the pain point in these tools was not that they were lacking in enough configurations, or the drop-down menus didn't look nice, or the UI didn't have nice floaty arrows that connect the dots. The fundamental problem here was there's so much friction in the building, and you needed to find some way to take all the friction out. And you can't do that with the same drag and drop design pattern. You actually had to start from scratch. And so when we showed this to people in the early days, it was interesting. You could see they almost missed the old way of doing it. They're like, what if I want to click into that block and then change the configurations of that block? And we know that the block is not real. It's just a visual representation of what the code's doing. So there's no like way to click into the block and change the configuration. And so we had to push back against some of that initial instinct and say, no, you just chat with the system and you say, hey, I don't want it to do that thing. I want to do this other thing. I want to change the message that's sent. I want to change this and that. And you can just chat with it. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Jake. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Serval. We are building an AI platform for employee support. So automating employee help desk requests, things like I am locked out of my laptop. I need access to this application. My computer's slow, all those kinds of internal employee support requests. We're essentially the AI native service now going after this massive category of IT service management, or also known as enterprise service management.
I've been listening to a Founders podcast a lot. I just discovered it. It's fantastic. I really like how David Senner, the host, it's basically like if true crime were about business case studies. I can't get enough, but he always talks about like these he's like discovering these repeated patterns with like founders. One of those things is belief in oneself, that I don't know if this is going to work, but I believe it's going to work. And he just talked about, I just listened to the story about Steve Jobs' wilderness years, where really like he didn't really have any commercial successes until his 40s anyways. Like you could say that like, oh, well, the Mac was really cool. It was maybe an inspiration for great computing, but it commercially wasn't a success. And he was 30 when he got pushed out of Apple. And he spent 12 years in the wilderness with like no hits at any of his like professional projects. And he had $100 million net worth after he left Apple. And he spent half of it, $50 million, bankrolling Pixar for 10 years. And so like imagining like 10 years of like no business model, no market or anything like that. And then ending up selling it for like $7 million like after going public. Like it's this idea that like he was a missionary, like he believed that he could do it. He believed in himself, and he knew that like, hey, their differentiator was we have this team we have the right people on the bus. We'll figure it out. Why now? And why this vertical specifically for you?
Yeah. So prior to starting this company, I was director of product at a company called Verkada, which makes enterprise physical security cameras, access control alarm systems, all the software that goes with that. And the buyer there was IT departments. And so I spent 5 years of this company basically doing customer discovery with IT, trying to figure out, what do I go and build for IT next? What are their pain points? What are their problems? And one of the most interesting things was their pain point was all around automation. They wish they could automate help desk requests, but also onboarding and offboarding. Now, this was not relevant to my job at Verkada, so I had to push them away from the things they wanted to talk about and then talk about more Verkada related things. But I became intimately familiar with this phenomenon of they really want to automate more. And that really struck me because there are theoretically all these tools for automation. You drive down the 101 in San Francisco and you see all these AI startups that do automation. And so it should be a solved problem and more stuff should be automated, and it's not. And I got really interested in that question of why don't we automate more? And the more I thought about it, the more I talked to IT leaders, the more I realized the problem is not that the tools are not powerful enough or they can't do these things. It's all the friction in building these automations. Automations today are very much these drag and drop workflow builders. If this, then that, configure this trigger, then this response, then this rule. And it's powerful, but you have to go in and do all those configurations. And it could take you hours, days, weeks, sometimes months to build something as simple as a password reset or onboarding workflow. And you're just not going to do it because the task itself that you're trying to automate only takes you a few minutes. So if you could have a system that actually made the automation faster than going and doing the task manually, then you could eliminate that friction, that trade-off, and you'd start automating a lot more. So that was the idea that sparked it. And I realized actually you can solve the broader challenge of employee support, enterprise service management as a category is called, which is where companies like ServiceNow play. You could actually disrupt this category if you fix this automation problem, because then you could automate all these requests that are coming into employees, and you could automate all these enterprise workflows that you're building these platforms. And so I really had this bottoms up take of hearing this pain point from the market, believing that we had a unique way of looking at the problem and technology that was starting to catch up and making a lot of this possible. And why not us was the answer. My co-founder and I, who was also with me at Verkada, we'd been building incredibly successful products at Verkada for 5 years. We've been founders before Verkada and felt very confident we could take on the massive growth in the space. And now it's been a year and a half in, and we're not done yet. We've got a lot of work to do, but we've raised over $125 million. Their most recent round led by Sequoia, the $1 billion valuation. And we're already starting to really see a lot of success and penetration up market where these legacy providers really dominate.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I mean, okay, so you said a year and a half, 18 months. That sounds like, as of this recording, when uh Claude started getting good at coding. Like, so would you say that was kind of like the spark, like the holy shit moment? Like for everybody, it was like the holy shit moment of like, oh, it's actually good now. Like,
I think it definitely made it work, but we had to take that bet before that happened, right? So
okay,
we left our jobs and we started the company really before AI coding was all that reliable. It was good at, you had Copilot and it was good at some autocomplete tasks, and there was some promise there, but it didn't work. And to be very clear, the early versions of our product did not work. The final state that we have today is you describe a workflow like a password reset or onboarding, and the system builds itself by writing the code that powers that. In the early days, we tried that and it was very unreliable. It could work if you had a lot of guardrails, if you gave it a bunch of examples, you fed it, force fed it, all these, hey, this is how you might want to build this workflow. And as long as you stayed in the lanes, you'd get what you're looking for. And, but it was so close to working that we had a lot of confidence, especially at that time as the models were getting better all the time, that we are very close to something being unlocked. And that just started to happen. And the models made the tool more and more powerful. And we built a lot of the infrastructure and thick software application around that.
what was like the biggest challenge as like the models just got better and better in such short time frames? I remember talking to someone from Amazon that it was always like the bleeding edge guy at the company. Like he could always be like a year ahead of everybody on like what the next like trend was on like what's going to be the capabilities of technology. And he told me in just like a phone call, like this is the first time I can't keep up. It's like a full-time job to like keep up with like the capabilities. What was like the biggest challenge then to build in this like hyper growth of capabilities?
Yeah, what was really hard about this time period was when to bet on the models getting better and when to build as if they were never going to get any better or not going to get significantly better. And it's very hard to make those trade-offs during that time period because you could just wait and say it's not worth building additional guardrails and all kinds of infrastructure and checks and balances. There's all these things you can do to try to make the models behave better. And you can invest a lot in that, but then that investment could be wiped out by the next generation of the models. So that's what really made it hard is you had to make all these decisions with imperfect information. And we generally leaned, especially at this time, because we were starting out, we didn't have a lot of customers. We leaned towards assuming that the models were going to make most things better. Over time, that shifted, and we have less and less assumptions built around the models getting better and more assuming that we have to make the existing models work really well, regardless of what happens with the latest models. And that's just had to shift over time. But yeah, especially in those early days in summer, fall 2024, it's just changing all the time. Like every single update completely changed how we thought about it.
Yeah, when I mean, catching the wave is always like an apt metaphor. It's not like you guys are catching the wave. I'm going to expand the metaphor and like describe what it sounds like starting a company when this like all this stuff happened. Is that real like surf bums back in the day would get up very, very early, and they'd live like an hour inland. They didn't live near the ocean, and they'd have to like road trip, like basically road trip in the morning to just catch like one or two waves and do all this inconvenience and like coordination to just get like that opportunity to get like a immaculate untouched wave where it's not crowded. That's kind of like what it sounds like when you're like really early, is that being first usually puts you at the risk of like getting splat in the wall. But like maybe what were some like maybe like maxims or like rules of thumb that you developed from that experience of, okay, we see the opportunity, we believe in ourselves, we're gonna get up really, really early. Like it's like 4 a.m. in the AI world right now, but we see where this is going. Like what taught you about that experience? Like what did you gain? What did you unlearn doing it this way? Instead of just like waiting and seeing like for other people like splat on the wall first and then, do like the Apple way, I guess I would describe it. Like
Yeah, I think because we were using these tools day in, day out, the promise was so clear to us, and we were consistently impressed by the things they could do, even though there was a long tail of reliability concerns, and back then, at least, a lot of hallucinations and all these ways that they would fail. But a lot of times they did things that were surprisingly good. And I think that that's what kept us really motivated and going, was that, hey, I can see these prompts that we give, and all of a sudden we have this workflow that actually works, and it works surprisingly, and it didn't take any time. And I think that's what really inspired us in the early days, was this stuff is cool and it's working. And yes, there are problems, but those problems seem like they can be mitigated in all kinds of ways. And I bet, especially given the pace of where the technology was going, we don't feel like we're at the edge yet. And this is just going to keep going. I also thought about it, and this was a unique perspective, because at Verkada, we built our own wireless protocol. We built wireless sensors, and me and my co-founder are very involved in that. And I, and this is not like a perfect metaphor, but I liken a lot of the AI in the early days to how kind of wireless communications work, where wireless communication is not very reliable at the kind of the physical level. There's a lot of loss of signal. There's a lot of lost data. There's a lot of challenges and interference and all these problems. But we've built such robust systems that account for all of that and can mitigate all of that, that we have the experience that wireless is very reliable, and that we obviously we're having this conversation through wireless microphones. And but what's actually happening at the physical layer is actually there's a lot going on that reconstructs this and makes it work, even though not every single bit is getting transferred with perfect reliability. And so when you factor in, like, you take a physical constraint like wireless communication, then over years of technology, you turn that into some very reliable, robust communication system. I felt the same was true in the early days of AI. Even if it doesn't get all that much better, like, I bet that we're not even tapping into all the things we could do to build infrastructure on top of this to really take advantage of it, even if occasional inputs, outputs are quite unreliable.
you just remind me of the story, like early story of Spotify. If anyone hasn't like listened to it, Gustav Sonderstorm, Strum. Well, I probably butchered the name, but really admire the guy. He's the basically head of all technical software at Spotify and all the job families in R&D. And he just talked about how like the differentiator of Spotify was that they took existing technology that was getting better. They like saw like a macro trend. He called it a macro like wind of more reliable internet connection. And they, to create the illusion of like instant or like fast, I wouldn't say it's like an illusion. It's just like they solved a problem creatively using engineering. They broke up the first 30 seconds of the song file and would play that fast because it would be it's easier to do like the first 30 seconds like fast, and then that buys time for the rest of the song to render in the back end. And yeah, and that's what makes me like what you reminded me of is that and this is a Thinking Out Loud podcast. Sometimes I'll just like say something, but the new wrinkle in my brain, like listening to what you said, is like eventually there's going to be a point where there's diminishing returns and just counting on like the raw technology, but that doesn't rule out any like creative application of that technology to be like different. And I feel like we're getting pretty close to a place where like the reliability and like what you expect from AI, like people aren't as impressed anymore with improvements. So now it's more
It's
about,
even,
okay,
well, it's hard
yeah,
to, a new LLM comes out, and it's supposed to be better in all these ways. But as a consumer, a lot of times it's hard. How do I even test it? Because it's already so good at all the things I want it to do. How do I know that
Yeah.
this new, GPT is actually better than the last one? It's hard to tell the difference because we feel like we're reaching a certain frontier there in a lot of ways, at least in the basic consumer interaction. And so I agree. We haven't even scratched the surface though on what you could do with the fundamental technology. And taking it back to like wireless communication, like radio, the gap between having basic radio communications and then all the things we do with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and the technology behind that, there's obviously a ton of innovation and technological advancement that happens even though the like fundamental physics have not changed.
Yeah, I mean, the software we're using to record right now, like the video that I'm seeing isn't what's gonna go into the editing booth. They're running like this is Squadcast, which was acquired by Descript, but it's running in a separate track, an actual like Google Meet, like quality video chat. And then in the background, it's recording locally to someone's device, the actual high quality footage, which will upload at the end of recording. And that's what I use to edit. And so like and I didn't understand at the time, but I'd like look at the video and I'm like, oh, this doesn't look good. And then I'm recording it. I mean, I'm putting it into the editing booth and I got, it's like these high quality 10, at least like 1080, or even like you can even do 4K because it doesn't matter. You're not streaming 4K, and run it into like your editing booth, like right away, which is a huge, like step function. So like in the book Pattern Breakers, the whole premise is that just because that everyone has access to the same technology doesn't mean they all have like the same approach to applying that technology. Like what I guess like what was like the insight of like, and maybe you've already like said it, but I'm gonna try to dig a little bit deeper here. Like what was like the insight of like how's your approach different, and like how are you counter positioning?
Yeah, I think everyone who's ever approached automation has started with this idea of this drag and drop workflow builder of I want to have this no code solution
Mhm.
and I want to say if this, then that. And every generation of these systems has just basically said, okay, we're going to build a better workflow builder. And they start with the same structure and they make
Yeah.
the UI better. They make it easier to configure, but they fundamentally don't change the structure. And there's this built-in assumption of it has to be a no-code system. So we have to have these abstractions, these like blocks, right?
Mhm.
There's an if trigger block, and then there's a block that does some action, and you have to standardize the inputs and the outputs so that people can use this that are non-technical and string these blocks together. And there's all these assumptions built around how workflows are built. And I think as AI is coming out, we're starting to think, what if you didn't have any of those assumptions and you just could describe what you wanted and then you could build it in code. Now, the user wouldn't have to be technical to do this anymore, right? Because the AI can write the code. And then if the AI is writing the code, which is a really efficient way to get all this complex logic is through code, then the visual layer, because you do want to show it to a user visually, that could really be anything you want it to be. And so one of the interesting approaches we said is, what if that no code block based workflow visualization, what if that was essentially made up? And the source of truth is actually the code.
Mhm.
Visualization doesn't have to have a perfect mapping to what the code's doing as long as it's an accurate description of how the code works. And that was such a freeing of the constraints. Then you can take a very complicated onboarding workflow, which if you build this in one of these legacy tools, is like, you got to check if this value is null, and then you go down this other path, and then you got to do this. And if that's not true, then do this. Then you got to like something very simple can stretch out into hundreds and hundreds of nodes and boxes. Whereas we could basically take the code that handles all those cases and loops through all that and handles that in a very concise way. And then we could choose to visualize that code in a way that makes a lot of sense and is easy to follow and track. And that doesn't have to be like this one for one virtualization of the code. And that kind of like freeing of the constraint, I think that was such a cool decision we made in the early days. And it's really playing out today.
Yeah, well, what's been like the response, like the feedback to like breaking the mold? I love what you said. It's just everyone's like, we're going to start an automation company, and then everyone goes to we're going to use the same exact pattern. Like so,
Yes.
they're not different at all. They're just it's a Me Too product, and in order to do that, you have to spend a ton of money on marketing and sales and brand, like invest in brand, and it's like I'm going to make like a productivity software like Notion. Like, I don't think that like it's going to be so hard to just like make a Notion competitor because you're using the same approach and Notion has like 10 years of brand equity that that's going off that you have to like change how the game's played almost like you're like what's been the reactions to doing that? Like,
Yeah, I think you have to understand what the actual pain point is. And so
yeah.
the pain point in these tools was not that they were lacking in enough configurations, or the drop down menus didn't look nice, or the UI didn't have nice floaty arrows that connect the dots. Like, the fundamental problem here was there's so much friction in the building, and you need to find some way to take all the friction out. And you can't do that with the same drag and drop design pattern. You actually had to start from scratch. And so when we showed this to people in the early days, it was interesting. You could see they almost missed the old way of doing it. They're like, what if I want to click into that block and then change the configurations of that block? And we know that the block is not real. It's just a visual representation of what the code's doing. So there's no like way to click into the block and change the configuration. And so we had to push back against some of that initial instinct and say, no, you just chat with the system and you say, hey, I don't want it to do that thing. I want to do this other thing. I want to change the message that's sent. I want to change this and that. And you can just chat with it. And I think in the early days, that was an unfamiliar user interaction, but I think we benefited a lot. And this is an interesting topic of a lot of times enterprise SaaS products can benefit a lot from consumer trends, because at the end of the day, enterprise IT buyers and users are also consumers. They go home, they don't sleep at the office, and or they're like an IT enterprise SaaS buyers. Like, they live and breathe and die as enterprise SaaS buyers. Like, they go home and they're a consumer and they use ChatGPT and they use like all the consumer tools, and then they go in the office, they use a different set of tools. And so I think all of the stuff that's happening in AI on the consumer side, it really changes a lot of the expectations and expected design patterns for our enterprise users. And just over the course of from starting the company to now, such a change in their response where they're more and more familiar with this kind of chat-based interface, more and more preferring that towards interacting with a lot of clicks with the UI. And so I think that's been tremendous. And now the feedback we get from customers, they've never been this excited about a product that they've used before. And it's because we've taken something that used to take them often weeks or months, and we've made it instantaneous. And they just have never seen anything like that. And I think what's really cool is we also enable them to be builders. A lot of these folks, they want to build things and they're stuck in more menial parts of the job. And with Serval, they can actually just go and be creative and just say, here's how I want it to work, and spend more time on like the creative problem solving aspect instead of like the clicking and dragging and all the things that are inherent to the old way of doing automation.
Wow. Yeah. I'm like, okay, there's so many like directions we could take this. Thank you for waiting for me as I pause and like just digest what you just said. It's so like one, yeah, like one thought that you triggered, it's in like the biography of Johnny Ive, where it was talking about like their early like iOS designs, how it's very skeuomorphic,
Mhm.
right? And the reason I'm saying like bringing up this story is it ties a lot to like the feedback of like I kind of miss my abstraction of like a whiteboard sketch of a flow chart where Johnny, after like a few releases of iOS, Johnny was like vocally like very against skeuomorphism because like yeah, it worked when you're trying to get people introduced to the technology, like automation, like that whiteboard pattern, that approach to like automating things. Yeah, it worked to like get people understanding like this is basically how code works. It's just a visual like logic, business logic steps. And now that like people are understanding that business logic is just flowcharts, and then when Johnny eventually like took over like iOS like design and like went to like more of like the flat style that we've known for a long time, it's just under the assumption that like we're not like assuming like our customers are stupid anymore. Like they've been using the phone. We have usage data. They understand the metaphors. We can start moving away from like the concept of a Rolodex or like a green felt game table. Like people are living in this thing now. Like we could start habituating them to like more of a different like design language to understand it. Like personal story, like you talk about like all the time it takes to like, cause it's so hard to even use these like low code tools because you have to plan. Like there's a design phase that doesn't happen because most people like don't know how to plan software because they don't know the capabilities. And so there's still like a technical limitation to get there. I spent 2 grand to have a guy teach me how to use like Airtable, like for the podcast, like use Airtable, like Zapier, make.com to create, scale up like the post-production process, automate repeatable tasks. Now, the problem with that flowchart metaphor is that it's not just one like flow. It's like 20 working
Yeah.
together. And so like you do like the first flow chart, which then puts like an object, like like a system primitive into one state. And then there's another flow chart of like, well, when it gets to that state, then do this logic and this logic. And then there's like this engineering, like technical design of like guaranteeing tech debt because you could, brute force like flow by flow, or you could be like, well, we could automate it. And we've seen like the NAN like thumbnails
Yeah.
of like 200 nodes, air handling, all that stuff. Like I, it's almost better just pay the 2 grand, tell someone exactly who's done the design work and the planning to just tell you how to do it. And then whenever I try to like do my own projects, I'm like, it's great for prototyping, but I don't want to maintain this. I don't want to do the air handling.
Yeah. And so it's basically, yeah, we had that same insight. One of the early conversations that was so informative for us was we went to an IT leader and they were building a lot in Okta workflows, which is powerful, but one of these classic kind of visual no code workflow builders. And he said, hey, like my CFO came to me and said, I've got this. The way I want things to be is that when somebody submits an expense report, I want to get approval from an M5 level manager or above. And if so, go up the chain. But if you reach the CEO, you've gone too far and drop down to an M4, whatever the next closest manager is for review. That was the workflow. So described it in one sentence, made a ton of sense. Then he pulls open Okta workflows and he shows me the workflow he built. And he has to scroll and scroll because there are hundreds of nodes and connectors and if this, then that, and error handling, and what happens if this value is null, and like, how do you do this, and what message do you return to the user, and how do you map all these fields together? And he spent maybe 2 months building all this out. It was impressive and like very proud of it, and that's great. But we thought it was fascinating that you could describe what you were looking for in one sentence. And then he went to go build it. And it took you all this time and energy, and you ended up with something so complex and no one could ever take this over, right? He left or somebody else had to manage it. Like no one knows what's going on here. And what that got us thinking was the way these systems have historically been built, it's almost like the worst of both worlds of the way a lot of this is abstracted out, it becomes a way too technical system for someone who really wants a non-technical experience that wants to just say, hey, here's what I want. How do I do it? And then for a very technical user, it's an annoying level of abstraction where they're saying, this is really weird that it's forcing me to think along their system and their lines. I just want to go and write code because it'll be so much more straightforward and streamlined and condensed than all the stuff that's happening on the page here. And so we realized like it's too technical for non-technical users, not technical enough for the folks that really want to get in the weeds. What if we could solve both problems at once? And so that was the core idea that started Serval was, what if you could just describe in natural language what you wanted to automate? You let AI, as you said, you hired somebody to help teach you and build the plans. You let AI basically fill that function of saying, okay, here's what you want to automate. I know how to build that. I'm going to build that in code. So it's fully deterministic. It's going to work the right way. I'm going to use these APIs for all these different applications to do it. And then I'm going to show it to you, end user, as these nice visual steps that probably abstract away a bunch of stuff that's happening behind the scenes that is
It's like a
not
level,
important.
it's like a level
Exactly.
zero diagram. Yeah. Oh man. And also I like how you just pointed it out. Like I did technically hire an agent to do all the planning for me. It just costs a lot. So like, like an insight that I'm learning talking to a lot of like AI founders is agents have always been there. It's just the cost has gone down by a
Yep.
lot.
Yep.
Man, that's awesome. Like it'd be now I'm going to just say something like I have like a new idea I want to like just stress test it with you. And so this is an ad hoc segment of the show. I'll just say that of like, okay, let's jam on this like concept, right? It's the insight that you're almost creating. So like we think about like horizontal and like vertical markets, right? Like vertical SaaS, horizontal SaaS, like horizontal SaaS prioritizing the roadmap just looks like how do we like appeal to as many verticals as possible, and the trade-off is like flexibility means that like yeah, like a Salesforce or something like that, where like it basically because of that like horizontal spread, it creates this cottage industry of Salesforce consultants. Like it's not specialized, and so you need to hire agents to help you do that, right? And then vertical SaaS is like, okay, this is a CRM for real estate agents, and it does everything. If you're as long as you're a real estate agent, it does everything. You don't have to think about it. It matches all the like mental models and primitives of like what that work looks like. Like Cursor is like a horizontal SaaS, like it's an IDE, and it's technically build anything or everything. I feel like automation, like, I mean, the opportunity here is you're not making an automation tool. You're basically making like a vertically integrated IDE just for IT.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's horizontal in the purest definition of it, but we've squeezed the end of horizontal SaaS because we said this is a for a very particular user within the organization,
Yeah.
with particular set of access and particular goals and an application stack. And so, yes, even though we sell to all industries and it's horizontal in that regard, what's very interesting is that the way IT works at a large manufacturing Fortune 50 company and the way it works at a fast growing Silicon Valley AI startup is remarkably similar. They have remarkably similar challenges, remarkably similar jobs, application stacks. Everything ends up looking very. There's a lot of what we do that ends up feeling like vertical SaaS because we can be very opinionated. We can say exactly what it's for while still selling to the broader market. And I think that's one of the cool parts about the business is we've been able to basically say, yes, it's a cool automation platform that anyone can use or any industry can use, but really we built it for one use case. And I think that's been really important for our success is that the general purpose automation is very crowded. And I think a lot of times when people get into these tools, what is this for? And the company's job is constantly telling people, oh, let me give you 20 ideas of how you could use this. And that just becomes very challenging instead of us giving it to somebody who knows exactly what it's for and exactly what they want to do with it.
Yeah, I love that because the software I don't use has a really good, not that like it's a good thing that like this anti pattern shows up, but has like something university, like company name academy, where it's like they make their own like education business
They
to
have to.
like, yeah, because it's so like it's not like focus like the core like ICP, like who on the org chart are you selling to? And like I've never seen when you go that like broad on like the sales side, like on the go to market, like the reason Figma works is it's like it's a visual composition tool, and it was very focused to like the procurement persona of a like design director or head of design. Like you're targeting the person that has like the ability to pay you for it. But like problem with Zapier is like there might be like a finance team license, there might be like an operations team license. So the different organization, like they're not sharing information or anything. It's just as siloed. It's like the sales team's like whoever I could sell it to, I'm gonna sell this
Mhm.
to. And then that like caps its impact.
Yeah, and you can build obviously very successful businesses with that approach, but I think it doesn't ever get into the massive enterprise software players that dominate a lot of these categories today, the Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday, which really own a very opinionated part of the stack where businesses absolutely run their business on these platforms and cannot easily migrate off.
Do you and they also can't fire the Salesforce admin that like is being difficult, but like you need them because to your point, the problem with any implementation of these tools is there's a key man problem where you there's no like it's in their best interest not to have a succession plan. They have to like rip and replace from scratch if they get rid of that person. And I mean, I'm not a fan of that, and it's not that kind of podcast like an opinion op-ed article or anything like that. But the fact that like you could take back the agency, like you're not dependent on the good graces of the Salesforce admin or the ServiceNow admin to solve
Yeah,
like
and
a very
bring
simple problem. Like,
Yeah, exactly. You kind of bring the power back to the people that are most proximate to the actual situation. So you have the IT team that's in the help desk, able to build their own workflows to automate help desk requests instead of sending that off to either an internal admin, but more often actually a complete external consultant, which
yeah,
will give you a 3 to 6 to 12 month turnaround time on that automation. And then by the time that's done, guess what? Your business process may have changed already, and you changed your mind about how you wanted that to work. And yeah, I think empowering the people at the close level of the problem to solve their own problems is part of what we do. The other part of what we do, which is really cool and surprising to me, is that group that starts building automations in the IT team for the IT team starts to become an automation center for the broader organization because everyone sees what's being done. And HR says, hey, could I use this tool to do X, Y, and Z, and finance and legal and all these other teams? And IT becomes a center for automation and evangelists for automation across the organization. And they go around like missionaries and they teach these other teams how they can build with these tools. And it's really cool to enable folks to be builders and creative and really elevate them in the organization because they've been enabled by these tools.
yeah, like your positioning statement of like it's AI native, like ServiceNow. It sounds very similar to like how Figma first positioned themselves. Like we're like AI native, I mean, or I guess like cloud native Sketch, and then now they're like basically close the creative gap for a ton of different job families. Like I see product marketing managers using like Figma products. I see people that like you never would have thought would be like in a design tool, or I guess like a tool that was originally meant for designers. But like now their positioning is like now we're kind of like empowering people to be able to benefit from design and tools. They could even say that probably take credit for like the growth and growing influence of like the design profession. Like because they when they started, I remember listening to an interview from like the founder Dylan, and like he's like when we started Figma, like the design market did on paper wasn't a huge TAM, and like design was not like a power like a core like operational like player that it is now. And then like from start of Figma to where it is today, like the headcount job, like the job growth of like the design profession has gotten so big that like they made the market by like creating the tool that enabled like collaboration, like using that cloud insight from like the technology. And so I'm like thinking like, oh, I could see like 10 years out, like your company, like, oh yeah, there's a playbook, there's a precedent here of like IT people can be empower like orchestrators and that people that empower, like they could coach other departments to solve their own onboarding. Because I mean, every director of any job family, they're probably if they're like good as a manager, they're writing like a Google Doc of like first 9 days onboarding, get
Yep.
access to this software, get access to this software. What's stopping them from just making their onboarding flows for their employees themselves?
Yeah. And you think about this persona in IT, they got into this profession because they're excited about technology. They want to use technology, they want to be close
Yeah.
to it. That's different than other departments. You don't go into HR, finance, legal because you're excited about technology. And so treating them as, hey, IT, you're the ones to bring this in, and then you can use this across the company. You're really enabling them to do the things they always wanted to do versus just sitting around doing password resets and giving people access to applications. And that's not why they got into it.
This is why like my reframe, like any like designers, engineers, I think even product managers that are like skeptical and like scared of AI, like engineers, like I feel like a common anti-pattern at a lot of companies I've been to is that engineering has low morale, and they've gotten to the point where they just stopped caring, and they're just like, okay, product, yeah, we'll build it. And then you like look at the quality of the coding output, and you could see that if it wasn't on the requirements, they cut corners to make that like release happen, to make the PM happy or whatever, or the designer happy. And they've like lost their agency because of how hard it is to build software historically. And it's like, you should be excited that you don't have to do the grunt work anymore. Like people got into engineering because they were inspired by great engineers that like built great things. And it was a creative profession for a while until it became like I wouldn't say capitalism, but like I guess like the market found out like, oh, software is pretty cool. And then like MBAs get involved and then it's like, oh, engineering's a resource now. Don't think. We will think. We'll give you the requirements. And then no wonder they stop being creative. And it's like it's so empowering. Like, I mean, I was in the product management role for like a couple years. And then as soon as I just saw like where AI was going, I'm like, I want to take another because I'm a trained designer. I want to take another stab at designing because this is like the coolest time in history to be
Yeah,
a
I
designer.
think
Yeah.
we like to say that we unlock meaningful work. That's one of our mantras
Uh,
internally here. And we just feel like every job, there is this delta between the idealized version of that job that you have in your head, like what that person does day to day. Like the child, I want to be this when I grow up, like that idea of what this person does, and
mhm.
then what the actual day to day looks. And we want to basically use our tools to bring everyone closer to the idealized version of what that job looks like.
Yeah, like, I mean, this is really like a silly story, but me and my best friend, like in high school, loved the TV show Suits. It like made like being a lawyer, like the coolest job ever. It's all about quips and litigating and stuff. And then and the whole premise of Suits is it's like a law firm that only hires from Harvard, blah, blah, blah. My friend, I wouldn't like, he'll say that that show did not influence his decision to go to Harvard Law School and become a lawyer in New York. The running bit between us whenever we catch up is like, so like, is your life like Suits? And he's like, no, it isn't. I'm just reading all the time. Like, there's no creative, like you pay your dues and eventually you could order some like associates around to like look cool, maybe if you're not like burned out and dead on the inside. But yeah, it's like,
But AI is changing that. I mean, tools
yeah,
like Harvey,
exactly.
and it's really cool. And I think that's happening
No,
across all these functions. And I agree. I'm an optimist on what AI is going to do to the workplace. I think it's going to make everyone's job a lot more interesting, a lot closer to what they wanted to do when they started out.
man, I could keep talking forever about this. Like, so Jake, I've really enjoyed this conversation and it's added a ton of new wrinkles in my brain, especially that like how you approach creating AI tools, like the paradigm shift of like the new ways to approach a problem, right? By like abstracting out like all the planning phases. Like I think that was the big gap in automation tools. That like, oh, what else? Like what other like planning and like, tactical design work could be automated in different verticals, like understanding like this insight, right? Because AI is getting really good at just planning like very like well scoped execution work. But I want to respect your time, so I'll give you the open invite. Like, if you ever want to come back on the show and talk about anything new, you're more than welcome to come back on. But do you feel like there is anything that hasn't been said that should be said on the record before we sign off?
Well, Guy, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think it's been a really exciting conversation. Yeah, I'm just very excited about where we're going, where AI is headed. One of the interesting insights when we started the company was, man, over the past 20 years, it really feels what all these software platforms could do outpaced anyone's ability to actually implement and use them. And a lot of what I think we're bringing and other companies are bringing is like actually tapping into all the capabilities that have, again, theoretically existed for a long time, but no one's ever really been able to go that deep into the tooling to get all the benefit out of them. And that's really exciting. So thank you again for having me on. I think, again, we could talk more and more about everything, but this has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, and so how can people find your work? How can they find you, contact you, talk about?
Absolutely. The company is called Serval, www.serval.com. A lot of great video content. We're big into video, so showing how customers use this live. And then I'm Jake at serval.com and on X at Jake Serval.
All right, and I'll make sure that that's all in the show notes to make it really easy for the listener. Jake, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review.
Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.